Dziękuję. Pan poseł Agnew, bardzo proszę.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew.
Thank you very much. I think I've heard more humour from Martin Hausling this morning than I have in the whole of the previous 6 years, which is a good sign. Commissioner, good to see you here again. I'm only going to talk about things that are genuinely within your grasp. First of all, credit where it's due. These 6 points you've given us about making things a little bit easier to fill these forms in is greatly appreciated. It is one thing for an official to sit in an office saying, well, you must do this, that and the other. It's quite different on the farm to put it into practice on the ground. And I know that particularly items 3 and item 6 here will be appreciated, so I will thank you on behalf of British farmers for that. But there's always a but, isn't there? And the but is on timing. As you know, the British government, in trying to administer your scheme, spent about £500 million on a computer programme that simply hasn't worked. One of the reasons it hasn't worked is that you need broadband with a particular speed. And many farmers just haven't, either they haven't got any broadband at all or they haven't got the speed. So the problem is then, they then give the job to a consultant, which not only costs them money to have to pay the consultant to help fill the form in, but the consultant is getting a deluge of forms and they're running out of time. Added to that, our government in Britain has then said, well, we'll issue a paper version. And many people are being told, yes, we'll send you a paper version, and a week later it hasn't arrived, and a week after that it hasn't arrived, and it's a bit like the man who's being told that a cheque is in the post. We are getting a big problem accumulating here, and of course the people who are really so badly affected are those who are the greenest of the lot, those who have lots of small fields, lots of little EFAs and features that they all have to map. There was one lady farmer who said she had 55 fields on her farm. It was taking at least a quarter of an hour to try and put the features on into each one. So what I'm building up to here is a plea for perhaps a further extension. You may get that from others, but I'm going to put it in now, because other representatives of other countries in this room may say, well, United Kingdom, that's your tough luck. You should have got on with this. I would like to remind them that it is the British taxpayer who massively supports this across Europe, and that the British taxpayer is not going to be very pleased if our own farmers get heavily penalised for late submissions of the form, whilst European farmers are getting it. So I will leave you with that thought. We do need more time. The other thing I want to talk about is the conviction that we can change the world's weather for the better by the way we farm. And we only had a vote in here this morning about emissions. Now, I have sheep and many other people have cattle, etc., and they eat grass and they emit methane. This is what they do, and this is what they do whether they're in the wild or whether they are domesticated. Now, this is presumably going to be part of, not co-responsibility, what's the word you use? No, not co-decision, there's another thing. If you don't get things right, you get clobbered. What's it called, Jim? The cross-compliance, that's right. Now, Commissioner, let's just look at my flock of 700 sheep. If they are producing as much methane in 3 years' time as they are today, are you going to penalise me? I mean, where is the end game in all of this? I really do want to know what is going to happen here. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję. Zgodnie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agnew. So as I said at the beginning, after we'd had that initial set of questions from the coordinators, I will pass the floor back to the Commissioner. So I'll do so now.
Thank you very much, President, and thank the coordinators for their comprehensive views on matters, all of which are very topical. I think I should outline, for the benefit of the committee, arising from the question from Mr Dess, the EFA review. This is what was agreed by Parliament, that we would carry out, after 1 year of implementation, the EFA review. And what many of you were saying to me on the last occasion is that the spirit of implementation of what was intended in the EFA was not being implemented properly by Member States, and perhaps being interpreted properly by my officials. And so I asked my officials to have a look at the guidelines about implementation, and we came up with some interpretations that would be helpful to beneficiaries in Member States. And we had a good look at how we can actually implement the spirit of what you intended as co-legislators. So this is why we have extended, to apply ourselves directly to Mr Agnew, I've extended the final date of aid applications for direct and area-based payments in 2015 and amended the rules for identification and registration of animals. We have also looked at how we interpret the EFA layer and the current recommendation to map the EFA areas as soon as possible. And we looked at how we can actually interpret the hedges and the ditches and the buffers and all of the issues that were causing you concern. And I think we came up with a very reasonable outcome on those. 4 metres was the figure that we arrived at that was reasonable, where to allow some flexibility there, but still not, still stay within the spirit of what we intended in terms of good environmental practice, in order to protect biodiversity, but also to ensure that we had protection of our budget situation as well, which is what, of course, was the reason why many of these environmental issues were introduced in the first place, in order to ensure that we had not had good environmental practice, but also there was a budgetary issue involved. You would not have got approval for many of these reforms and implementation of the CAP reform were it not for good environmental measures being put in place. So issues around the interpretation that I have outlined in my correspondence clearly will hopefully give you some comfort for the fact that I have listened to your concerns in relation to some practical matters without damaging the spirit of good environmental implementation. I extended the date then from the 20th of May to the 15th of June. Now I am hearing some voices, all right, saying that there are difficulties in some member states with the land parcel identification system, in the UK and perhaps Italy and other places where some flexibility may be required. But I'm not in a position to say whether we have any further flexibility we can give there. But we are helping the member states through our dedicated division in D3 to try and implement these particular measures as flexibly as we possibly can and meet whatever problems people might have in the IT system, because it is, after all, a new policy. Major changes have been made, and within the EFA we have said that you don't have to map the EFAs until 2018. We are not going to impose an additional penalty on farmers in addition to any error that they may have, which is the case now, for 2 years up to 2017. So we are given 2015, 2016 an exemption from any further penalties on top of the error that you may have in relation to any particular EFA matters that were wrong. And equally, I am also saying that if you have a wrong declaration on an EFA, you might have another parcel that would be able to fit the criteria for EFA on your farm. We are prepared to accept that in good faith. So these are some of the changes that I made, and permanent grassland obligations as well as part. These are under discussion with your experts in your member states at the moment, so hopefully they can come to some reasonable solutions there. So the point I am making, I suppose, is that I have listened very carefully to what you have said in relation to implementation of the existing policy, even and without resorting to what we are going to do in terms of changes, that we are bringing about maybe a more common sense interpretation that was causing some concerns for the beneficiaries. And Mr Agnew, I am glad to say that the broadband strategy which you advocated for rural areas is something very close to my heart. There is significant money in rural development programmes already, but the difficulty we have and what we are trying to do is to coordinate about 5 different streams of rural broadband monies that are available right across the European Union system, and we need a one-stop shop in order to deal with it, in my view. So I am hoping that we can do more coordination, or indeed better coordination, within the European Commission services in order to ensure that we have a targeted and a very forceful reaction to what you have identified as a very serious problem for about 15 to 20% of our populations right throughout the European Union, particularly in rural areas. And finally, beef genomics is actually an interesting word now in terms of options that member states are taking in rural development programmes. This is a programme that has been implemented in an environmental way in order to reduce carbon intensity. It is part of our rural development programme options that is available to member states, which will reduce emissions but also help enormously in having better breeding programmes for our agricultural industry in our member states. So I know that the country I know best is introducing one at the moment, and perhaps it would be a model that you could look at in terms of what could work in the UK as well.